During Roy Rogers' live performance in 1983, an inebriated man threw a boot at him. He wasn't upset, he was perplexed. He couldn't understand why Roy was playing blues, because he assumed he was the singing cowboy from old movies. In Roy's life, that was not even the worst instance of mistaken identity. By the time he turned 60, he had won Grammys, collaborated with Miles Davis, and seen his best buddy pass away from cancer brought on by the smoke in clubs. However, the one thing he was unable to avoid was a nickname his brother made up, and he carried that joke with him everywhere, even to places where he was not taken seriously. It is the tale of a man who was never meant to survive. William and Louver Rogers, a working-class couple trying to make ends meet, welcomed Roy Franklin Rogers into the world on July 28, 1950 in Redding, California. Billy, his older brother, who was a huge fan of vintage cowboy movies, insisted on using the name Roy Rogers because he thought it would be a humorous homage to the well-known singing cowboy. The whole name stayed, and Roy carried that decision with him everywhere. Their mother consented, in part, because a distant uncle shared the same first name. He was always Roy Rogers, even if other children were referred to by their first names. He was a prime target for teasing just because of that. He only ever wore cowboy boots to school once, and he never heard of it again. Years later, he could joke about it, and even claim that it gave him a sense of humor. They pointed, they laughed, and they exclaimed, "Here comes Roy Rogers in his cowboy boots." But it was difficult in those days. However, things were different at home. Lou, his mother, had a gift for playing the piano. She lived it, not just played it. In the middle of her work, she may be cleaning a counter 1 minute, then stroll over and begin playing a lovely song. She has an ear that was not receptive to sheet music. It was a result of the emotion. Roy would observe, listen, and take it all in while sitting there. He was mimicking what he saw his mother do by picking out small tunes on a toy keyboard before he even picked up a guitar. There was no official training. It was something more profound, more organic, something that became ingrained in him and stayed there. The family left peaceful rural Reading when Roy was 10 years old and relocated to Vallejo, which is on the San Francisco Bay. It was a significant change. His father, a World War II Liberty ship commander, had secured a significant position managing the mothball fleet at Suisun Bay, a cemetery of hundreds of military vessels merely floating in the ocean. The family had to leave the little town life behind because it was a big issue. This new surroundings was a shock to Roy. Vallejo was full of movement, louder, faster, and more varied. Initially, he felt out of place. Then, however, something began to take place. There was a lot of real music in the Bay Area, and Roy was attracted to it like a magnet. Like he did at work, his father was a tight ship at home. Cutting corners was not William Rogers' style. His principles were to arrive early, put in a lot of effort, and do things well the first time. Roy's sole purpose in delivering newspapers before school was to earn money for himself, and he made a choice that would alter his life with those monies. The precise amount he had saved from that path was used to purchase a Stella acoustic guitar in 1962 when he was 12 years old. It wasn't a present. He merited it, and he was unable to put it down once he got it. He spent hours each day playing, developing calluses, working out chords, and following his inner sound. Billy, the brother who gave him his name, had begun smuggling records into the house in the meantime. Their parents didn't enjoy these kinds of records. They were electric, loud, and raw. Through Billy's collection of illegal goods, Roy first heard Elvis. Little Richard followed by something quite different. Billy once brought home a record by the king of Delta blues vocalists, Robert Johnson. Roy was shaken, not simply inspired by that album. The weird, nearly voice-like guitar, the open tunings, and the way Johnson utilized a slide on the strings. Roy developed an obsession. He tried to identify such sounds by ear all night long. Music was not being read by him. He wasn't enrolled in classes. He was paying attention and following it note by note. Roy joined a band named the Newports when he was 13 years old. They portrayed Chuck Berry. They performed at local dances, when a real band was still necessary if you wanted people to attend, and they donned glossy gold lame jackets. Roy was the group's youngest member, but he didn't fall behind. Playing with older, more seasoned musicians helped him pick up skills fast. He was totally captivated by the enthusiasm on stage and the audience's reaction. Roy took a different approach in high school, while his peers embraced the psychedelic waves that were sweeping across San Francisco. Fuzz pedals and swirling lights didn't appeal to him. He desired the authentic blues. To see men like John Lee Hooker, Howlin' Wolf, and Muddy Waters, he rode buses into the city by himself. He had no intention of partying. His purpose for being there was to study. He observed each note, each hand gesture, and each expression on the face. For him, they were more than just concerts. They were instructive. Roy and his bandmates assisted B.B. King in carrying his equipment up the steps at a local VFW hall in 1968, 2 weeks prior to his graduation from Vallejo High. Older black admirers in fancy clothes made up the majority of the audience, and they were nodding along with every slide and bend of BB's guitar. Shortly afterward, Roy ran into King once more. San Francisco's Fillmore West this time. That evening, a largely white young hippie audience gave B.B. King his first standing ovation. As Roy stood there and watched him cry on stage, he became aware that something was shifting. Blues was coming over. It was no longer only underground. Roy remained rooted in the past, though. He didn't seek notoriety. He was not a trend follower. He continued to use his own funds to purchase guitars. He continued to refine the sound he had initially heard on the Robert Johnson song and experiment with bottleneck slides. He began performing in clubs and coffee shops throughout the Bay Area, gradually establishing a name. Roy had fully entered the blues scene by the late 1960s. Shortly after graduating from high school, he played modest venues, formed bands, and never gave up on improving. He collaborated with David Bergen, a harmonica musician, to record the acoustic CD, A Foot in the Door, in 1976. Before splitting up, they even made a contribution to One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest's music. When Roy Rogers joined forces with David Bergen, a harmonica player, in 1976, he was around 26 years old. This was no ordinary jam session. It turned out to be his first real attempt at music recording. They recorded an album called A Foot in the Door for Waterhouse Records under the name Rogers and Bergen. It felt different this time. Even though Roy had played in various ensembles throughout the Bay Area in the early 1970s. Later, Bergen recalled how Roy used to play him vintage records by blues greats like Muddy Waters and Robert Johnson. Roy lived in that world. Since he first heard Johnson's eerie tone as a teenager, he had developed an obsession with slide guitar. Their original tunes combined Roy's gradually developing slide technique with the rawness of acoustic blues. This marked the beginning of something more significant, the point at when Roy stopped playing in the background and started creating his own musical personality. In 1975, something out of the ordinary occurred a year earlier, when Roy and Bergen contributed to the music of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. They were drawn into the Hollywood sphere. The Milos Forman-directed movie, which starred Jack Nicholson, would win 5 Oscars, including Best Picture. Although it's unclear which elements of the soundtrack were his, this was Roy's first foray into the film industry. Nevertheless, he got a taste of something new from this gig. Producers, deadlines, and film studios all helped to elevate his reputation. That same entrance would pave the path for larger partnerships with artists like John Lee Hooker and Miles Davis on the Hot Spot years later. However, it all began with a few slide notes that were hidden within a film's soundtrack. Roy and Bergen were touring throughout California by 1977. Although they weren't playing at major venues, they were consistently performing in coffee shops and bars, particularly in the Bay Area. The audience may sit near and see your fingers move in these little spaces. Roy flourished in these spaces. He wasn't ostentatious, but his slide guitar and gritty, deep playing made people pause and pay attention. He started to acquire the kind of natural confidence that cannot be taught at this point. He honed his craft and established a reputation among local blues enthusiasts by performing night after night and performance after concert. Even though there aren't posters or attendance logs from every night, those little appearances set the stage for a career that would take him far beyond California. The pair eventually ran their course. No major headlines, no public backlash. Sometime before 1979, they just parted ways. Roy started to think more broadly at that point. He wanted to plug in, go electric, and form a legitimate band, even though the acoustic setup had its allure. In 1979, according to some reports, he created his new organization. In 1980, according to others. In any case, that's when he made the Delta Rhythm Kings a reality. Roy was at last in complete control of the 3-piece band. He wasn't involved in someone else's performance this time. The act was him. Things began to move quickly. Roy formally introduced the Delta Rhythm Kings with a sold-out 90-minute performance at the Last Day Saloon in Novato, California, on January 15, 1980. Drummer Tom Bray and bassist Steve were part of the lineup. They played basic, tight music that was dominated by Roy's slide guitar. Furthermore, it was more than just his style of play. Roy was able to lay down melody and bass lines, while maintaining the rhythm by wearing his slide on the pinky of his left hand. Seeing three musicians in one body was like that. Behind the scenes, bookings and publicity were handled by Roy's wife, Jill Toller Rogers. She recognized the importance of grassroots development. Roy's little business became something that could endure, because to the combination of smart planning and unadulterated music. The band's performance at the San Francisco Blues Festival Revue in 1982 brought them to Europe. When they recorded a live CD in Paris, Roy's solo on the song, Slidewinder, knocked the house down so hard that everyone stood and applauded for 5 minutes in a row. Everything changed on that trip. All of a sudden, Roy was performing in Brazil, Australia, Switzerland, Italy, and Norway. And his name became well known back in the United States. On Steve Mann's recommendation, he joined John Lee Hooker's Coast to Coast Blues Band shortly after that tour. He would collaborate with Hooker for the following 4 years, which resulted in a considerably larger audience, Grammy nominations, and admiration from jazz luminaries like Miles Davis. Then the incident in Texas. An inebriated man in the audience began shouting, and eventually tossed a boot onto the stage, as the Delta Rhythm Kings were in the middle of a performance in 1983. The dude wasn't angry. He was perplexed. He couldn't believe Roy Rogers was performing blues on stage, since he thought he was the well-known cowboy from old movies. Roy used a joke to defuse the situation, before it escalated into a brawl. The entire incident was recorded as band legend. As a reminder that he was a slide guitarist and not a rhinestone cowboy, he even decided to call his label Chops, Not Chaps. Roy formalized it in 1984. In 1985, he established Chops, Not Chaps Records, and put out Chops, Not Chaps, his debut solo record. It featured 12 tracks, each of which demonstrated what made Roy unique. Instead of mimicking the blues, he was enhancing it by adding humor, edge, and a little swing. Radio stations nationwide played songs like Devil Got My Woman and 3,220 Blues. Even the blues chart saw that record peak at number 15, which was quite an accomplishment for a label owner. He didn't require a major record label. Owning everything himself allowed Roy to maintain his musical style and create a sustainable and intimate business. In 1984, Roy married Gail Toller as well. She was surprised to find out he wasn't black after seeing him perform at the Great American Music Hall in 1980. She thought he was from the South, either Georgia or Mississippi, because she had heard his music on the radio. But it clicked when they met. Jill was more than a love interest. She turned to become his career's driving force. She was well versed in music promotion, having operated a booking business in Atlanta. She secured more than 100 performances for Roy in 1985 alone, including opening engagements for Stevie Ray Vaughan. Roy was able to concentrate on his music because she handled the business. Together, they established a stable, self-sufficient, and wholly unique working life. When Roy Rogers joined John Lee Hooker's Coast to Coast Band in 1985, he had just returned from a European tour with the San Francisco Blues Festival. In the group, he was more than just another guitarist. He was going to be Hooker's most intimate collaborator. Roy learned Hooker's unique rhythmic sense, which deviated from conventional blues patterns, by playing guitar and singing with him for 4 years. It was hard for most musicians to keep up. Roy didn't simply keep up, though. He deepened it and matched it. They bonded. Roy co-wrote the song I'm in the Mood with Hooker and Bonnie Raitt, and it was completed in a single take. Later, that one recording would become a landmark and earn a Grammy. In his 70s, Hooker told people that Roy's slide guitar was among the best he had ever heard. It wasn't just empty praise. It was the beginning of an unexpected comeback. Hooker's fame had been diminishing. Roy Rogers was the one assisting him in shining now that he was back in it. With the publication of The Healer in September 1989, that return became a reality. After working in the industry for decades, Hooker eventually had a Grammy-winning album at the age of 73. He debuted at number 62 on the Billboard charts for the first time in his career. His life was transformed by the album, not simply his profession. The sessions were produced by Roy at San Francisco's Russian Hill Recording Studios. Top-tier visitors like Robert Cray, Carlos Santana, and Bonnie Raitt were paired with Hooker. Craig's newfound school spirit was infused into Hooker's old soul by the song Baby Lee. Santana's guitar danced around Hooker's voice on another, the title track, The Healer, which Rogers co-wrote. It was dubbed genius by critics. In Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the Netherlands, the album achieved gold status. Hooker began to receive royalty checks that truly meant something after years of financial hardship. He was able to unwind and savor the results of his music for the first time. It wasn't easy to make The Healer, though. Rogers and Hooker had a heated argument. They debated for 3 hours straight over how fast Baby Lee should be during one session in 1988. Rogers nearly quit because he was so frustrated. Hooker's style of playing drove even seasoned musicians insane, since it deviated from the standard 12-bar blues pattern. To stay with him, you had to have good ears. However, the music itself provided the answer. They began jamming at midnight one night after a long day of arguing. The version that ended up on the album was that take. Their art was so unique because of that kind of sloppy, mystical spirit. Even if they didn't always agree, they managed to make it work, and people took note. Then they continued after The Healer. With Hooker, Roy made 3 additional albums. Mr. Lucky debuted in 1991, with appearances by Booker T. Jones, Van Morrison, Albert Collins, and Keith Richards. It received a Grammy nomination and peaked at number 101 on the Billboard 200. They released Boom Boom in 1992, which included Jimmy Vaughn, and revived Hooker's 1962 hit. They returned in 1995 with Chill Out, which received the W.C. Handy Award and peaked at number 3 on the U.S. Blues chart. Robert Craig continued coming back, using blues to create a bridge across generations. A whole other thing happened in between those blues projects. Roy contributed to the music of the movie The Hot Spot in 1990. He and Hooker weren't alone. Taj Mahal and jazz great Miles Davis were also present. Roy assisted in producing, and Jack Nitzsche wrote the music. The outcome was eerie. Miles's whispering trumpet, Hooker's growly voice, and smoky blues were all included into songs like I'm Gone and Harry's Philosophy. It was praised by critics. One even referred to it as music for which people should be grateful. A whole new generation was introduced to that sound. Years later, when Street German, a French electronic artist, borrowed Harry's ideology in his popular song Sure Thing, Roy did not limit himself to blues music. He and Bonnie Raitt co-wrote Gnawing on it for her breakthrough album Nick of Time in 1989. In addition to selling 5 million copies, the record took home 3 Grammy Awards, including Album of the Year. The influence began immediately, even though the song was not nominated for a Grammy until later in 2003. Roy had been invited by Bonnie to jam at her residence. That afternoon, after they experimented with a few concepts, the song was created. Later on, she described Roy's manner as one of the hottest she had ever heard. That project demonstrated Roy's versatility as a musician. He might make the transition and popularize slide guitar. Roy created a second Grammy-nominated project by 1998. It's Ramblin' Jack Elliott, the folk hero, this time. Friends of Mine featured well-known names: Bob Weir, John Prine, Emmylou Harris, Arlo Guthrie, and Tom Waits. It was honest, comfortable, and relaxed. Roy collaborated with a group of engineers to convey that emotion. They had been together before. Roy had produced Elliott's first Grammy South Coast, back in 1995. In the music industry, that type of trust is difficult to earn, and Roy consistently demonstrated his ability to bring out the best in others. Roy has performed with Carlos Santana and Sammy Hagar outside of the studio. For Santana, it was about 2 guitar aficionados respecting each other. It became more intimate with Hagar, many sessions, loads of vitality. Their styles merged with Roy's, advancing blues into rock, and even Latin. Once more, his guitar blended genres in ways that most artists couldn't, making an appearance on soundtracks like The Hot Spot. It was obvious that he could stand his footing with any artist in any room. He added slide guitar to Winter Light by Linda Ronstadt in 1993. He went on tour with Elvin Bishop a year later. It wasn't an isolated incident. Years later, they performed at venues, festivals, and even on the same stage as Marcia Ball and Bishop's Big Fun Trio. They continued to perform together in 2018. The relationship remained playful and strong. Roy's guitar work earned him a nomination from the Blues Foundation that year. It was a tribute to all that he had done to preserve the blues both on large stages and off stage. He continued to take people by surprise. He introduced the blues to audiences throughout Europe in the mid-1990s by touring and recording with Italian blues rock artist Zucco. Perhaps the most surprising development, however, was when he began collaborating with Ray Manzar of The Doors in 2005. Nobody anticipated the 8 years of music that resulted from that strange coupling. Shortly after Ray's death in May 2013, they recorded an album titled Twisted Tales, which was released in June 2013. Poets like Michael McClure and Jim Carroll wrote the lyrics for the tunes. Strange, lovely, and profound were songs like Just Like Sherlock Holmes and Eagle in a Whirlpool. The album peaked at number 1 on the American Roots Rock chart and number 6 on the Billboard chart. The combination of psychedelic synths and blues slide was unexpected, but it worked. It was not ostentatious. It was authentic. Roy Rogers never stayed in one box, therefore it worked. He continued to play, to move, to discover the essence in every song he touched. Roy Rogers and Norton Buffalo teamed up in 1987 to accomplish something that was uncommon at the time. One had a natural ability to play the slide guitar. The other could create the sound of a whole orchestra with a harmonica. They clicked right away. They eventually issued their first acoustic album, R&B, in 1991, 4 years later, under the auspices of Blind Pig Records, a small blues company based in Michigan. Out of the 12 tracks on the CD, one was particularly noteworthy. Roy wrote the song Jessica for his daughter, and it was nominated for a Grammy for Best Country Instrumental Performance. They performed all around the world that year, incorporating live recordings and full rhythm sections into their sound on their upcoming album, Traveling Tracks. When a live video of them performing Ain't No Bread in the Bread Box appeared on the Nashville network, things really took off. There were 500,000 spectators. It was the first time blues had made such a foray into country television. They made 3 albums together between 1991 and 2002, while Norton continued to appear on Roy's solo efforts as well. There was genuine chemistry. Then came the surprise for which nobody was prepared. Norton, whose harmonica was featured on 180 albums, was told that his lung cancer was incurable. He was 58. He had never in his life smoked a cigarette. He was scheduled to perform with his longtime guitarist friend, Johnny Varazza, on September 5, 2009. He led. He has never canceled a performance before. Doctors informed him that it was stage 4 the very next day. He vanished on October 30, 2009, less than 2 months later. Many think that his years of performing in smoke-filled clubs caught up with him. His bandmates recalled putting plastic bags over their clothing to prevent the smoke odor from getting into their luggage. Norton never voiced any complaints, though. That year, Roy Rogers lost more than just a friend. Someone he referred to as a brother passed away. They had such a strong bond that they could perform on stage as if nothing had happened. Even after being separated for months, rehearsals are not required. It was merely present. It's rare to find a relationship like that. Roy went to see Norton a week following his diagnosis. Even though Norton was in pain, he continued to be cheerful, humorous, and optimistic. Norton gave his okay for a memorial performance before to his death. He wanted it to assist in covering his wife Lisa's and their 2 children's mortgage. The homage took place at Oakland's Fox Theater on January 22 and 23, 2010. It was enormous. Norton was referred to as my companion in harmony by Steve Miller, who had performed with him in over 5,000 gigs over the course of 33 years. Roy Rogers, Huey Lewis, Bonnie Raitt, and the Doobie Brothers all appeared. Bonnie got down after performing a song that was very emotional for her. Lisa presented Steve Miller Norton with his favorite harp, scarf, and hat. That night, nobody in the crowd forgot. The performance Roy and Norton gave in New Orleans back in 1994 cemented their reputation for all time. When they performed Terraplane Blues at the Jazz Festival, the audience stood up. To keep up with the intricate chord changes, Norton alternated between 5 different harmonas in mid-song. Nobody other could do that with such ease. The occasion was so impactful that the North Sea and Montreux Jazz Festivals invited him. They were in high demand throughout Europe. The instrumental album Slideways, which Roy published in 2003, peaked at number 3 on the Billboard Blues chart. It was the highest rank he held alone. From the meters, he performed alongside elite musicians like Zigaboo Modalist and Philip Aberg. Norton was also on it. Roy was nominated for a Blues Music Award for the record. It was an obvious message. Instrumental blues could still make a strong statement in a world that was changing. Split Decision, Roy's second album, was released in 2009. He preserved Delta blues essence, while including some contemporary features. He even brought his son Sam with him. Songs such as Patron Saint of Pain demonstrated Roy's growth while maintaining a connection to his beginnings. He returned to the New Orleans Jazz Fest that same year. Marcia Ball this time. The audience adored it. His slide guitar was compared to a time machine by critics. It was better than ever, according to some. Roy has a lengthy Grammy history as well. He has received 8 nominations. He was the producer of The Healer, a Grammy-winning film that gave John Lee Hooker a new lease of life. After that, he contributed to 3 more Hooker albums. He also produced records by Ramblin' Jack Elliott. Non and On It, which he co-wrote with Bonnie Raitt, was nominated as well. Additionally, he received Grammy recognition for his contributions on the Hot Spots soundtrack with Miles Davis, Hooker, and Taj Mahal. He always had something significant in his hands. Then something almost put a stop to it all. Roy appeared on stage in Gville, California, on May 15, 2010. It was the evening's 3rd song. His chest began to burn like a hot iron all of a sudden. He thought it was heartburn and tried to continue playing. Then the power went out at the venue. The lights went off. The noise ceased. When Roy left the stage, he said to his roadie, "Call someone. This isn't right." 90 minutes later, a stent was implanted by the doctors. He might have died from the heart attack, they suggested. However, it didn't. 5 days later, he returned to the stage to perform for 3,000 people in Ukiah. His cardiologist found it hard to believe. Absolutely no scar tissue. According to some, Norton saved him by flicking the power switch from above. Roy performed more than 100 performances that year. Over 1 million people watched one of them after it was filmed for PBS. He began organizing events to raise awareness of heart health. After a lengthy hiatus, Roy returned in 2015 with the release of Into the Wild Blue. It was intimate. He had lost both Ray Manzar from The Doors and his brother. He put all of his energy into the music, though, rather than slowing down. Song for Robert, one of the tracks, was dedicated to his brother. A rough rendition of Come On in My Kitchen was another. The critics took note. They claimed that it sounded authentic, emotional, and alive, much like his live performances. Roy published Ghosts of the Past in 2023. It featured AI cleaning, and Norton Buffalo restored recordings. It revived the magic of the pair for a new generation. Berkeley is already teaching his slide techniques. His blues clinics are accessed online by young guitarists. He is still performing, producing, guiding, and making progress. Roy Rogers is that person.